Chapter 1. Phoena.
The wolf in me had never been afraid of anything, until she ran us both straight toward the one person who could destroy us. She'd been pushing at the edges of my skin for 3 days. The fever hit hard the morning after my 18th birthday. Not the gentle pre-shift warmth I'd read about. Mine arrived at midnight like something had grabbed my spine and wrung it. I pressed my face into the pillow and breathed through it, teeth locked while my housemates slept. By the 3rd night, the fever was a living thing. It moved beneath my skin the way a current moves beneath ice, patient, enormous, waiting for one crack. The crack came on a Thursday. She tore through me between one breath and the next. The world folded, a terrible, bright fold, and my bones rewrote herself with a sound I felt rather than heard, a deep, resonant snapping that should have been agony and wasn't. It was like pressure releasing that I hadn't known I'd been holding since birth. I came out the other side on 4 paws on the frost-stiff floorboards, and everything was different. The dark wasn't dark. The room breathed in color I had no words for, a spectrum that existed somewhere past the edges of what human vision allowed. The cold beneath my paws wasn't just temperature, it was a catalog: pine, dead leaves, old snow, and under that something alive, the musk of 2 pack members who had walked the east path 2 hours before. Their footprints were still warm in the world's memory. Sound arrived in layers: the creak of the house's bones, the slow breathing of 4 sleeping people, a fox somewhere past the east fence making small, deliberate sounds in the undergrowth. I could hear the forest. I could hear it thinking. And the forest was pulling at me the way a tide pulls at something that belongs to it. My wolf didn't ask. She moved us toward the window and through it. I had some vague awareness of the latch, of not breaking glass. And then she was running. North through the tree line at a speed that had nothing to do with my human legs. Pack territory unrolled around us in scent and sound, and something I can only describe as rightness, like a word I'd been trying to remember for 18 years finally landing on my tongue. I was a passenger. For the first 20 minutes, I didn't mind. She made running feel like the only honest thing a body could do. Every stride was deliberate, certain. The way she occupied space, occupied herself, was nothing like what I'd spent my life learning to manage. She wanted to be here. She wanted the cold and the dark and the pack's smell in her lungs. She found the forest legible in a way my human senses never had. Then she turned north-northeast. "Stop," I told her. She lengthened her stride. "No, that's the Corvus house." She took one slow step forward. My heart went cold in a way the frost outside hadn't managed. Every sensible thing I knew about myself, about my place in this pack, about what a woman like me could and could not be for a man like him, rose up at once. I threw myself against her. She walked forward anyway, deliberate, like something arriving rather than approaching. "Stop! Please stop! You don't understand what you're doing." She understood exactly what she was doing. That was the problem. I was the one who didn't know how to live with it. His scent hit at 200 yards. She slowed on her own. Wood smoke, cold stone, frost on iron, and underneath those, something I had no name for, something that moved through my wolf's whole body like the resolution of a chord that had been unresolved for as long as I could remember. She went absolutely still inside me. Every restless, prowling part of her just stopped, like she had arrived. Safe, one word, the weight of a mountain behind it. She walked us through the tree line toward the mansion's back terrace, which spilled warm light through open glass doors across the frost. My wolf moved like she'd done this before, like she was returning to something rather than approaching it. I rode behind her eyes and tried to remember how breathing worked. The door opened. Calder Corvus stepped out onto the stone terrace, barefoot, a glass of water loose in one hand. Dark training trousers hung low at his hips. Nothing else. The winter cold moved over him without appearing to register. He was built the way an alpha heir was built, broad across the shoulders and chest, the kind of body that had been asked to carry weight for a long time and had quietly learned to. I had been careful for years about looking at him. You learned to stop looking at things that were never going to be yours. He looked out at the grounds. His gaze moved across the lawn, slow, searching, and stopped. On us. His eyes found us the way a compass finds north, drawn there, certain, before his mind had caught up with the reason. And then the face I had watched from a careful distance for 3 years, the composed alpha heir expression, the one that held in training and in pack gatherings and in every room I'd ever seen him occupy, that face was gone. Something long held let go of him all at once. His shoulders dropped, the hand on the glass uncurled. His exhale was visible in the cold air, slow. He set the glass down on the railing. 1 step forward. My wolf's response was immediate and total. Every part of her pointed at him, as something fixed, as north. She had run here in the dark because she had already known, and now that she was here, she was certain about what came next. The 20 feet of frost between us was nothing to her. She would have crossed it in 2 seconds and been at his feet, and she would have felt no shame in it whatsoever. Something in my chest knotted so tight, it pulled the breath clean out of me. Mine. A fact delivered from somewhere so deep in me I had no argument for it. And then my mind, unhelpfully, started to think. Calder Corvus was, I had always known this, the way you know things you try not to dwell on, extraordinary. There was no other word that fit him, and I'd tried several. The way he moved through a room, the way the pack organized itself around him without being asked, the quiet authority he carried like he'd been born already knowing the weight of it. He was the kind of man who made you understand why the word leader existed. I had thought about his future mate sometimes, in the distant, theoretical way you think about things that have nothing to do with you. I had imagined someone who matched him. Someone who could walk into a room full of wolves and not immediately calculate the exits. Someone the pack would look at and think, yes, her, obviously, strong, certain, the kind of woman who moved through the world like she had a right to the space she occupied. I had pictured her clearly, actually. She looked nothing like me. And now, the ground was tilting under that thought. The thread between us was humming in the cold air, and my wolf was looking out through my eyes with absolute possession, and he had stepped forward. He was mine. I was his. I, who pressed myself into corners at pack gatherings, who gave one-word answers and meant them as full sentences, who had spent years watching him from a careful distance precisely because some part of me had always known that looking too long at Calder Corvus was the beginning of wanting something I had no right to want. His Luna would stand beside him at every gathering, every ceremony, every moment the pack needed to see its future. She would be the other half of his authority. She would have to be present, truly present, close, open, reachable, in every way I had spent my entire life learning to avoid. The pack would look at her and feel safe. The pack would look at me and feel... He took a second step. I ran. My wolf did not want to. The protest tore through me. Paws trying to plant in the frost, a sound rising in her throat that was grief and fury braided together. And I overrode her with pure, clean fear. We bolted back into the tree line at full sprint, and I didn't let her slow until his scent was gone, and the thread between us went thin as wire, and my wolf was shaking with rage aimed entirely, specifically, at me. I shifted back in the dark somewhere I didn't recognize. Knees in the pine needles, a thin shift that had survived the transformation by sheer luck. The cold arrived when the fur did not. My wolf's contempt sat in the center of my chest, white-hot and deeply personal. I sat in it until the sky went pale at the edges. Then I walked home. It was the walk that undid me, a little. The fear had been almost manageable. What undid me was quieter. The memory of him setting down the glass, of his shoulders dropping just slightly, of the way his exhale had hung in the cold air. He had stepped forward, toward me. And I had run, which was the only honest thing I knew how to do with anything that got too close. The communal block was still quiet when I got back at 6. 4 people asleep. 2 were not. Amira was in the kitchen in training clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, pulling her gold hair into a precise knot in the reflection of the kettle. Daria was at the table with both hands around a mug, still half asleep, her dark braid coming loose at the end. Neither of them looked up when I came in, which was the arrangement we had arrived at over months of proximity. They left me the edges of the room and I kept to them, and we all got along fine. Amira glanced once at the pine needles, the dirt, the general disaster of me. "First shift." It wasn't a question. I answered anyway. "Yes." She went back to her hair. Daria turned a page of something she wasn't really reading. I moved through the kitchen to get water and no one asked anything else, and the silence was the comfortable. I went to my room. In the mirror, pine resin on my jaw, the look of someone standing on the wrong side of a door that had just locked behind her. The dread arrived then. It settled the way cold settles into a house with bad insulation, gradually, thoroughly, in places you couldn't quite reach. I thought about what it would mean, about pack gatherings where I stood at the edges and people left me to it because they'd learned that proximity made me strange and still, about training sessions where I worked hard and kept to myself, and the silence around me was respected in the polite, faintly uncomfortable way you respect a habit someone clearly needs. About the conversations I wasn't meant to hear, low voices, passing. It's not natural for a wolf. She avoids any contact. It's like she is a lone wolf. She's not. She's strange. I had always been strange, an outcast. The pack tolerated me with a kind of baffled goodwill. She keeps to herself, she works hard, she causes no trouble, but the tolerance had never quite become warmth, because warmth required a proximity I couldn't hold still for. Even as a child, I had been the one who sat outside the huddle, present, but unable to close the last few feet. Something in me always flinched back from the moment before closeness, like the moment before contact was the worst part of any collision. I had built a life in the gaps between people. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was a habit that had calcified into shape. And now, my wolf looked back from behind my ribs with her absolute white-hot certainty. Fated mate, the alpha heir, a man whose entire future required a woman who could be what I had never once managed to be. Present. Open. There. The dread settled lower. Outside the window, the forest was still. Somewhere north-northeast, the thread between us hummed like a wire in wind. Thin now, stretched, but holding. I turned away from the mirror.
Chapter 2. The Quiet Pursuit. Calder.
He'd been watching her for 2 years before the bond confirmed what he'd already suspected. He hadn't set out to. She was simply one of those people who, once you'd noticed them, proved impossible to stop noticing. She was at every pack event and never in it, always at the back wall, the side exit, the chair farthest from the door. Most wolves move through a gathering the way wolves move through territory, claiming space, pressing close, building warmth from proximity. She moved through the same rooms like she was trying to leave as little trace as possible, like she'd calculated exactly how present she needed to be to avoid comment, and had arrived at that number precisely and not 1 degree above it. But her face when she thought no one was watching, and she always thought no one was, because she'd made herself quiet enough that people had simply stopped checking, her face was fully alive. Gold eyes moving over the room with an attention she never showed anyone directly, taking everything in, filing it, like someone who'd decided that the only safe way to want things was at a distance. He remembered the first time he'd registered her properly. She'd been younger, 11, 12 perhaps. A pack gathering after the autumn hunt, crowded and loud, and someone had approached her from across the room. He'd watched without meaning to, watched her register the approach, watched her whole body go still. She'd looked for one unguarded moment like she might actually cry. The other wolf had said something. She'd answered in what he could only imagine was one word, and the wolf had drifted away looking faintly confused, and she'd pressed herself back against the wall and breathed. After that, people left her alone. He had too. He told himself, when he thought about it at all, that it was the same protectiveness he felt toward any pack member who seemed to be managing something difficult, that she was a puzzle he was mildly curious about, the way he was curious about anything in the pack that didn't quite fit the pattern. He was going to lead these people. Understanding them was his work. That was what he told himself. He was honest enough privately to know it wasn't entirely true. He'd never been able to pin down what it was exactly. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't perform. She carried herself with a kind of deliberate smallness that should have made her easy to overlook, and instead produced in him the opposite of overlooking. He'd catch himself noting where she sat at a gathering, which exit she'd positioned herself near, whether she'd eaten. Small observations, habitual. He hadn't examined them closely because examining them closely would have required answering questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. Then she came running in her wolf form. He'd been asleep when his wolf woke him. His wolf simply pulled him upright in the dark with the focused insistence of something that had already decided and was waiting for the rest of him to catch up. He lay there for a moment, listening to the house settle around him, the cold coming off the windows. Then he got up, pulled on the nearest trousers, and went to the kitchen for water. He wasn't sure why he opened the door. Instinct, or his wolf's version of it, a pull he'd felt before in border territory when something required attention, but never like this. He stepped out onto the stone, barefoot, and lifted the glass to his mouth and then stopped. Her scent. He'd know it anywhere. Had known it for 2 years, filed under the particular category of things he'd been careful not to examine. But now it was different. Now it was carrying something else underneath it, something that hit him in the center of the chest like a key finding a lock. And his wolf surged forward so hard he gripped the glass to keep his hands from doing something else entirely. Mine. The word arrived before he had finished understanding it. He stood very still with it, the way you stand still with something large. Then he looked out at the grounds. A wolf at the edge of the tree line, gray and still, watching him. He'd never seen her wolf. She'd been a late bloomer, which the pack had whispered about, and he'd found unremarkable. But he knew exactly who this was. He'd have known her in any form, he realized, with a clarity that arrived quietly and settled in like it intended to stay. She was looking at him the way he imagined he was looking at her. He set the glass down on the railing and took a step forward. She ran. He stood on the frost and watched the dark close behind her and felt something in him go very still. His wolf wanted to follow. Every part of him that had been careful and patient and measured for 22 years wanted to follow. He stood with that wanting and breathed through it. He knew her. He knew from 2 years of quiet observation he'd never intended to turn into knowledge, that chasing her would be the exact wrong thing. She needed to run. She probably needed to run several more times before this was over. He went back inside. He sat at his desk in the dark and thought about her face at that gathering years ago. He was going to have to be careful. Careful in a way he'd never had to be careful before, because everything his instincts told him to do was exactly what would send her running again. Reaching, claiming, closing distance. He was going to have to do the opposite of all of it and trust that she'd find her way to him eventually if he gave her enough room. In the morning, he knew where he'd find her. He shouldn't have known. It wasn't his business where she spent her time, and he'd never made it his business, not officially. But he'd been noticing her for years. He knew she was in the archive room every Tuesday and Thursday. He knew she took her breakfast on the east bench and her evenings at the far window. He knew her routes through the building and which rooms she avoided, and the precise radius of space she kept between herself and other people. He knew too much, probably.
Phoena.
The archive room was where I went when the world got too loud. It was usually empty. It smelled of old paper and cold stone and nothing that required anything from me, which were the primary qualities I looked for in a space. I had a chair, the window one, angled precisely far enough from the door to see anyone entering without appearing to watch. I'd sat in it every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years. It had become, in the quiet way things become necessary, the one place I could breathe at full capacity. I'd spent the night before in my room not sleeping. I'd lain in the dark and thought about what had happened, which I hadn't meant to do and couldn't stop doing. I kept returning to the same moments, the way his exhale had hung in the cold air. He'd taken a step forward and I'd run, and the rational part of me knew I'd been right to run, and the other part, the part my wolf had claimed, had spent the entire night furious about it. I'd expected him to follow. He hadn't. I wasn't sure, turning that over in the dark, whether I was more relieved or disappointed, and the fact that I couldn't tell frightened me slightly. I knew what the bond meant. I'd read about it, the way I'd read about everything I'd never expected to apply to me. Fated mates, the old texts said, were the completion of something. Two wolves made to run together. It was supposed to feel like recognition. It felt, in practice, like standing at the edge of something very high. Because there was a version of this, a clean, simple version, where the alpha heir found his fated mate and the pack celebrated and the future arranged itself accordingly. And in that version, I had to be something I had never once managed to be. Present. Open. The kind of woman people wanted to move toward rather than quietly away from. I knew what I looked like at a gathering, pressed into the corner, eyes on the exits, answering in words that didn't invite follow-up questions. He would look at me and see that, eventually. He would eventually realize that I wasn't what he needed, and that would be devastating. I already knew it. I picked up my book and went to the archive room. He was in my chair. I stopped in the doorway. He had a book open and the look of someone who'd arrived early on purpose and was willing to wait as long as it took. He didn't look up, but he'd heard me. Wolves always heard. My feet wanted to take me back down the hallway. I made them carry me to the other chair instead, the one closer to the door. I set my books down and opened the top one and looked at the page. He let a full minute pass before he said anything. "What are you reading?" I turned the cover toward him without looking up. Jane Eyre. I'd read it 4 times. I was reading it again because some books were less like reading and more like returning somewhere you needed to be. "Is it good?" he said. I considered that. It depends what you want from it. What do you want from it? I hadn't expected a follow-up. Most people asked the first question and waited for the minimum and moved on. I looked at my page. She spends the whole novel trying to work out if she's allowed to want things. Silence. "Does she figure it out?" he said. "I don't know yet." He looked back at his book. "I hope she did," he said. That was all. I looked at the page in front of me and read the same line twice. The distance between his chair and mine was 4 feet, and I was aware of every inch of it. I kept my eyes on the text and my hands flat on the table and waited for him to say something else, ask something else, do the thing people always eventually did where they pushed until the discomfort became visible. He didn't. He read. Turned pages at intervals that meant he was actually reading. Occasionally, he reached for his pen and wrote something in the margin and said nothing about it. 20 minutes passed, 30. The tension in my shoulders didn't leave, but it settled, slightly. The way it settles when you've been braced for a collision that keeps not arriving. I turned a page. When he left, an hour later, quietly, without announcement, he paused at the table and set something down beside my books. A folded piece of paper. I looked at it after the door closed. It was the page I'd left here on Sunday. My own handwriting, a half-finished thought about the Bronte sisters I'd scrawled on the back of a receipt and tucked into Jane Eyre as a placeholder and apparently dropped without noticing. He'd written one line underneath it in his precise, slightly angular hand. She actually does figure it out. Eventually. I sat with that for a moment.
Calder.
She'd taken the door chair. I was not surprised that she took the one with the clearest exit. She kept her eyes down when she came in and set her books down without a word and opened the top one. I let her settle before I said anything. She was reading Jane Eyre. I'd read it. My sister had gone through a period at 14 and left her copy on every surface of the house until my father had started moving it from room to room like a chess piece trying to get back to its owner. I'd picked it up one evening with nothing else to do and stayed up until 2 in the morning without quite meaning to. I gave her the silence because she needed it. Most people didn't understand that silence could be a gift. With her, it very clearly was. She held herself like someone waiting for something to go wrong, shoulders tight, hands flat on the table as if they might otherwise betray her by shaking. Her attention stayed on the page, but I knew she was aware of me. Wolves always were. The bond didn't feel like the story said it would. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't heat, it was awareness. A quiet, persistent thread that kept drawing my attention back across the space between us. I read, or at least I moved my eyes over the page and turned it at reasonable intervals, while a part of my mind tracked the rhythm of her breathing. She turned pages too, not quickly, not slowly. The pace of someone who was actually reading, which meant she wasn't pretending, which meant she was trying. That more than anything made something inside my chest settle. Throughout, she just looked at me once. It happened when she turned a page and her eyes lifted without meaning to. They flicked across the table and caught mine and widened slightly before dropping back to the book as if the moment hadn't happened. I didn't comment. If I pushed, she would run again. That much I understood already. An hour later, I closed my book. She didn't look up. I stood, walked to the door, and paused at the table long enough to set the folded paper beside her books. She still didn't look at me, but I knew she knew I was there. Then I left. The hallway outside the archive room was quiet. I walked halfway down the corridor before my wolf stirred. Just satisfied. Which was strange. We had barely spoken, but she'd stayed, and that apparently was enough for now.
Chapter 3. Calder.
2 weeks, 8 sessions in the archive room. I'd stopped pretending I wasn't counting. She still took the door chair. That hadn't changed, but she had started to look more relaxed, which pleased my wolf, and, if I was honest, me. I wanted more than 2 hours twice a week. I kept that where it was, behind everything she could see, because I'd spent enough time watching her to know that pushing was the fastest way to lose ground. She needed to come toward things on her own terms. Rushing her would be like reaching for something wild. She'd be gone before my hand arrived. So I sat across the table and read, and let the hours pass, and managed everything else quietly. It was getting harder. She had ink on her wrist again today. She got it there when she was working fast, a small blue mark just below the heel of her hand. I'd noticed it before. I was not going to think about what I kept thinking about when I noticed it. I looked at my book. I turned a page I hadn't read. I needed to ask her. The pack had started talking. I'd caught it in corridors at the training yard, low voices that didn't stay as low as they thought. She'd caught it too. I could tell by the set of her jaw when she walked into any room. I closed my book. She glanced up. I need to tell the pack, I said, about the bond. A pause. I wanted to ask you first. She went still. I waited. She looked at the table, said nothing for a long moment, which I'd learned was how she thought. After what felt like an hour, "Okay," she said. "Okay, yes?" She looked up. "Okay, yes." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until then. I relaxed. "There's something else," I said. She went very still again. "I know this probably feels fast." I kept my voice even. "And I know you don't like people getting too close too quickly." Her eyes flicked toward me, surprised that I'd noticed. "I'm not going to push you," I said. "The bond is what it is. But that doesn't mean you have to rush into anything you don't want." She didn't answer. "I'd like to get to know you," I continued after a moment. "My mate, at your pace." I let the silence sit between us. "Is that all right?" She stared at the table for a long time, long enough that another person might have filled the space. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. I picked up my book. I had just turned a page when she spoke again, so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "I would like that too." I didn't look up, but my wolf shifted in my chest in a way that made it very difficult to concentrate on the paragraph in front of me. We sat in silence for another hour. When I left, I was already thinking about Thursday.
Phoena.
I couldn't stop thinking about it on the walk home. He'd told me what he needed, he'd asked, and I didn't know what to do with that. I'd said okay before I'd thought it through. The thinking came afterward, all the way home, through dinner, lying in the dark. I kept turning the same moments over and over, the way he'd looked at me, the steady pull in his gray eyes that made the world shrink to just the two of us. The pack had started talking. I could hear them. Low voices in corridors, the training yard. Most of it was ordinary curiosity. Why the alpha heir spent time in the archive, what he was reading, people filling in blanks with the easiest explanation. But some of it was different. Girls whispering after training, their voices dropping too late when they saw me. Someone in the east corridor saying his name and mine together. Then a silence that made my chest tighten. I kept walking. I was good at walking. I knew they weren't wrong to be confused. I thought about it in the dark. The honest version I couldn't dress up. He was going to announce it to the whole pack, and they'd all turn to look at me and think, her? I knew what a Luna was. Calder Corvus at Dylan's shoulder. The way wolves steadied themselves against her presence. She filled every room. And me? I thought about what I looked like entering a room. I thought about it for a long time. I'd said yes before I'd finished deciding. I wasn't taking it back. Taking it back meant giving him a reason to stop coming to the archive room, and I wasn't willing to do that. I knew his handwriting, the sound his pen made when he worked fast, that he was left-handed. I knew too much, and I was doing it anyway. I pressed my face into the pillow and thought about the assembly. 300 wolves turning to look. I breathed through it. I told myself I'd survived every room I'd walked into so far. Then I remembered his gray eyes across the table in the archive room. I'd seen him in the training hall before, calm, commanding, sharp. But in the archive room, he'd been different. Earnest, open, present. It melted something in me I didn't know could melt, something I'd spent years keeping guarded. I hadn't expected to feel safe. I hadn't expected to want him there. But I did. And that was the problem.
Calder.
I looked at the back left corner before I looked at anything else. She was there, wall behind her, side exit 2 steps right. Eyes just above the nearest heads, the exact distance that let her see the room without inviting it back. I would have known her position without looking. I looked anyway. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was still. But I could see it, the tension coiled in her shoulders, the way her toes seemed ready to push off and flee. She wanted to disappear. She had every reason to. The room had begun filling long before I stepped onto the dais. Wolves shuffled in, murmuring, finding spots along the benches. Families, sub-council members, young wolves leaning forward with curiosity. Everyone had heard the whispers already, fragments of conversation carrying through the corridors. Everyone knew the alpha heir was about to speak. I took a breath, feeling the weight of all those eyes, and the thread of calm certainty inside me kept me upright. She was mine, my mate. I would not doubt it, even if my chest thudded a little with the enormity of it. I let my gaze sweep the room once, then rested it on her. She hadn't moved, not an inch. Her body was rigid with caution, but she stayed. I stepped forward. The room quieted, a hush that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with anticipation. I spoke her name softly but firm. "Phoena, stand beside me." She shifted, hesitant. Her hands twitched. Her eyes darted toward the side exit. I stepped closer, instinct taking over. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. Our fingers touched and a jolt ran straight up my arm. Sharp, immediate. She froze for a heartbeat, and then slowly she relaxed. Her hands softened in mine. Relief, satisfaction, and a spark of joy spread through me. Quiet but powerful. The murmurs erupted, heads turned. Did he just... Is this some kind of... I ignored them. I focused on her, on the warmth of her hand in mine, on the way she had stayed. I let the room take it in. My parents' eyes met mine. My mother's smile was steady, proud. My father's expression was unreadable, calculating but patient. I cleared my throat and let the weight of the moment settle into the room. "The moon goddess has given me a fated mate," I said, my voice carrying across the hall. "Phoena is my mate, the one I am bound to, the one I choose, and the one I will protect." The room stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Then Reich, my closest mate, clapped. Slowly another followed. A few more joined, hesitant and uncertain, but acknowledgement had finally begun. I looked at Phoena. Her shoulders had relaxed just slightly. She was still unsure, still cautious, but she stayed. Her hand remained in mine, and that small connection, that small proof, made me feel whole. I finished the assembly, answered questions from the sub-council, and let the room settle. Every now and then, my eyes sought hers. She didn't look away. She hadn't run.
Phoena,
I stepped out of the hall, heart still hammering, the world suddenly quieter without the weight of 300 eyes on me. My wolf still throbbed in my chest, tethered to him, lingering in the memory of his hand in mine. I had wanted to disappear, to shrink into the wall, but he had been there. His hand had found mine. The first touch jolted through me, sharp and electric, but it grounded me too. My breath had slowed. My shoulders had loosened. For the first time in the hall, I felt steady, safe, anchored. But now, alone, every sound felt sharper, every echo heavier. Wolf ears were a curse. Every whispered exchange reached me whether I wanted it or not. A few voices near the south wall, the training yard cluster, 2 of them speaking low, cautious. She's going to be Luna? Has she even spoken at an assembly? I mean, he could have. I'm just saying, of all the. I pressed my hands against my thighs and forced my breathing to slow. Each whisper dug a little deeper, pressing against the certainty I had felt in the hall, the calm I had felt in his presence. My wolf stiffened at the edges of the tension, alert and anxious, and I clenched my fingers in my palms to ground myself. I reached my side exit and stepped into the cool air of the corridor. My heartbeat slowed slightly, but the murmurs followed me in my mind, pressing in with questions I couldn't answer. Every glance from the hall, every uncertain shuffle of a foot seemed to say, "Her?" By the time I reached my quarters, I felt hollow and heavy. I dropped my key into my palm and let the door click shut behind me. Alone, the tension swelled, pressing into my chest, reminding me of everything I thought I wasn't. I leaned against the door frame, letting my hand brush its edge, and remembered the warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his gray eyes. He had claimed me. He had held me in a way no one else ever could. And yet the whispers still echoed, drilling at my confidence, reminding me of all my insecurities. My chest tightened. My throat closed. Amara was there when I came in. She looked up, her expression warm and carefully arranged, like she'd been waiting to catch me. "Congratulations," she said. I hung my jacket. "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly, concern threading through her careful warmth. "I hope you're not taking what people are saying to heart. You know how packs are. They have expectations. It's not personal." I looked at her. "What are they saying?" "Oh, just..." She waved a hand, gentle. "You know, the usual, that he deserves the best." "And what does that look like?" And she paused. "I'm sure they'll come around once they see you together. It's just hard for people to picture, that's all. Someone who doesn't cover, lead, all of that." I picked up my jacket. "Good night." "Of course. Sleep well." I closed my door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, pressing my hands flat against the mattress. Someone who doesn't cover. Lead. All of that. The words pressed into me anyway. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, and let the echoes of the assembly wash over me again. 300 wolves turning, murmurs swelling, the touch of his hand, the gray of his eyes. I had known it since the terrace, since every Tuesday and Thursday sitting 4 feet from him in the archive room, watching him treat me like I mattered, watching him care, knowing he didn't yet see the full scope of who I was, how I froze in a crowd, how I shrank in ceremonies, how I couldn't be the center even if I wanted to. I thought about Thursday, about being near him again. I did want it. I wanted it too much.
Chapter 4, Phoena.
The archive was closed today. They were renovating it this week. My chest tightened at the thought. I wanted to see him there, to watch him move between the shelves, lean over the tables, to feel the thread hum between us as it always did. I wanted to hear the quiet scrape of pages under his hands, to catch the faint scent of him lingering in the air. All I could do was imagine him, and that made my heart thump faster, like it was trying to catch up with the rest of me. A knock came at 7 in the morning. I'd heard his footsteps from the end of the hall long before the knock. My stomach fluttered. My wolf stirred in my chest, curling her paws with satisfaction, letting out a low hum that made me grin despite myself. I froze for a moment, caught between wanting to run and wanting to throw the door open. He was standing there, holding flatbread, the spiced kind from the trader's path cart that vanished by 7, 2 portions wrapped neatly in parchment. He held it out as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "I haven't eaten," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, easy and teasing. "Come on, walk with me." I looked at the flatbread, then at him, then back at the bread. My fingers brushed my coat, slow, hesitant. My chest felt light, giddy, almost too big for my ribs. My wolf shifted, pleased, curled tighter and pressed closer to my heartbeat. I took a breath. I got my coat. The trader's path ran along the creek, quiet at that hour. He walked beside me and left space between us, enough that my shoulders didn't climb, enough that I could breathe without counting. The distance between myself and anyone near me had been a number I tracked automatically since childhood, a habit that had calcified into reflex. Far enough meant nothing could arrive without warning. We sat on the low wall above the water and ate, and the creek was loud enough to cover the silence, which I appreciated. "Tell me something," he said. "About what?" "Not Jane Eyre." I looked at him. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. I looked back at the water. "What do you want to know?" "What do you do, besides read?" Simple question. I was making it complicated, which was a habit. "I run," I said. "In the forest. Early mornings mostly, when it's quiet." "Alone?" "Alone," I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. "You could run with the pack. Full moon is in 2 weeks." Something tightened in my chest. I'd stood at the edge of the full moon runs 3 times in my life and watched the pack move together through the trees, that particular ease of bodies that trusted each other and felt the pull of it and stood at the edge and not gone in. "I don't think I can do that," I said. "The distance?" "The people." I paused. I turned the flatbread wrapper over in my hands. It's not that I don't want to. My body just stops. When people get too close. It's been like that since I was a child, and I've spent years trying to understand it, and the best I've managed is that it might be losing my parents. I looked at the water, which is strange because I don't actually remember it. I was 8. I heard myself and went still. I didn't talk about this. I had never talked about this. He didn't reach for the words people reached for. He was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand moved across the wall and covered mine. I went still. His hand was warm and certain and large, and he wasn't doing anything with it except holding mine, and I was waiting for my chest to lock the way it locked every time proximity arrived unexpectedly. It didn't come. I was at ease around him. I looked at him. His eyes were warm and steady, and then I caught what was underneath that. It moved through me before I could stop it, a heat low in my chest that my wolf seized on immediately, and I felt her stir and press forward, and I held her back and looked away. My pulse was doing something I hadn't authorized. His thumb moved once, gently, across the back of my hand. I looked at the water and breathed and let that be enough for now. "I'm sorry," he said. "About your parents. Both things." My throat closed. I pressed my lips together and nodded because words weren't available. "You don't have to come to the full moon run," he said after a moment, "but the offer stands. Whenever you're ready, no one will push you." We sat there until the light went and neither of us said anything else, and his hand stayed on mine. We walked back in the dark, and he left the same careful space between us. At my door, he said goodnight and waited until I was inside. I stood against the door with my hands flat on the wood and thought about his thumb moving once across the back of my hand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop asking myself if I deserved him. He was too good to be real. I had spent years being managed, tolerated, handled with the kind of careful patience people reserve for something fragile, something to keep at arm's length. I had grown so used to it that I barely noticed anymore. The careful distance, the brief exchanges, the way eyes skimmed past me in a crowd. I was used to being ignored. I preferred it. And now, he looked at me like nothing else existed, like I mattered above everything else. I didn't know how to be the center of attention. I lay in the dark and my wolf pressed forward with the warm certainty she'd had since the terrace. I know, I told her. She pressed harder. I know what you want. I want it too. That's the problem, because wanting it required believing I deserved it. And that was the wall I kept arriving at in the dark. I could feel the warmth of him from across a table. I could sit on a creek wall and not count once. I could say things I'd never said to anyone and watch him receive them without flinching. All of that was real. I knew it was real. And it still didn't touch the part of me that had been listening to the pack's unfinished sentences for years. He deserved someone they didn't have to accept, someone they all knew deserved to be there. Someone who walked into a room and held it rather than calculating how quickly she could leave it. The next day, I came back from the market. Amara was in the hall, coming out of the bathroom, hair loose over her shoulders. She paused when she saw me, eyes narrowing just enough to unsettle me. You seem to be managing, she said, voice clipped, like she was weighing my performance. I said nothing. I wasn't going to mention it, she continued, stepping closer. But the girls at training today, they were talking about you. About him. Her expression didn't soften. Warmth didn't touch her tone. I told them to stop, of course, but you know how these things go. Everyone has this idea of what his Luna should be, what she should carry. The ceremonies, the border assemblies, standing up in front of everyone at the summer gathering and actually holding the room. She let the words linger, sharp, deliberate. I suppose. I shouldn't be surprised you don't fit the image. She is his mate, yes, but some of us still notice what she lacks. I froze, chest tightening, unsure what to say. She stepped closer, fingers brushing my arm, not gentle, more like testing me. And I flinched. Oh, my bad, she said with a sharp tilt of her head, stepping back toward her room, but the edge in her tone lingered in the hall. I too went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I knew what a Luna did. I'd watched Kira my entire life, the way she moved through the full moon gatherings, the border negotiations, the summer assemblies where the whole territory came together, and every eye in the room found her and Dylan and steadied itself against them. She made it look like breathing. I thought about myself at the autumn gathering 3 years ago, standing against the back wall for 2 hours and leaving before the meal because the room had filled past the point I could manage. The training yard where I ate breakfast alone on the east bench because the communal table made my hands shake. He deserved someone who could stand in the middle of all of it and hold.
Chapter 5. Calder.
I found it impossible to concentrate that morning. Training yard duties stretched before me, but my mind wasn't on patrol or drills. It kept flicking to her, Phoena. Even the sharp wind cutting through the yard couldn't anchor me. Reich was waiting at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, head cocked at that familiar angle. Eastern Patrol reported movement near the Ashford boundary last night, I said before he could speak. I want 2 trackers on the ridge at first light. He pushed off the wall, sliding in to step beside me. Duran and Foss already handled it at dawn. Nothing territorial, lone wolf passing through. I'll confirm tonight. Good. We walked in silence for a moment. The yard behind us buzzed with early morning activity, cold pressing in. The Westfield Pack sent a request to move the spring boundary meeting forward 2 weeks, Reich said. Alpha's seen it. I'll talk to my father tonight, I replied. Reich grinned. And how's it going? With your mate? I kept my eyes on the path. She's hesitant. And how does that make you feel? I exhaled sharply. She's opening up, slowly, on her own terms. My wolf does not agree, but I cannot crowd her. Reich laughed softly, shaking his head. Dang, You're completely and thoroughly smitten. I shot him a look. Wait until you meet your mate. He winked and pushed ahead. I'll hold you to that. Later, I brought the border report to my father. He glanced at it, then leaned back, hands resting on the desk. So, you're coming to dinner tonight? I'll be there, I said. And Phoena, you bringing her? His tone was teasing, but there was genuine curiosity behind it. I shook my head. Not today. I don't want to crowd her. He nodded, a small grin forming. Fair enough. Your mother will be thrilled to hear about her when the time's right. Kira's already asking questions, and your sister too, curious as ever. I let the corners of my mouth lift. I'll handle it when she's ready. He leaned back again, smirking. Good. Otherwise, the whole family will corner you separately, and trust me, that's far worse than doing it together. I left the room, my thoughts already on her, Phoena. On her gold eyes, the way she moved, the quiet hum between us, counting the minutes until I could see her again. Phoena opened the door just a crack, gold eyes flecked with weariness, slightly swollen. I noticed it immediately. Are you all right? I asked softly. She blinked, sniffled, and gave a small nod. Yes, just an allergy, she said. I tilted my head, a teasing smile tugging at my lips. How do you manage to look this lovely every single time, even when you're under the weather? I couldn't stop myself from saying it. She just is so beautiful. She hesitated, a faint blush creeping across her cheeks. I kept my tone light. I wanted to ask if you wanted to go for a walk, though if you'd rather rest, that's fine too. Her gaze lifted to mine, hesitant but steady. I'll come. I want to. Good. Walk with me? I said quietly. She nodded, slipping her arm close enough that it brushed mine as we stepped onto the path. The evening was crisp, the creek running faintly below us, its steady murmur filling the quiet between words. I stayed just a step behind her, letting the thread hum warmly between us, aware of every small shift of her body. We walked side by side for a while, the silence easy. I kept my eyes on her, watching her shoulders relax slowly, the tension she carried loosening as the path wound along the creek. Finally, she stopped and looked out at the water. Her gold eyes caught the last light of the afternoon, distant and reflective. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd, letting my presence fill the space without pushing. I need to ask you something, she said, voice low, almost lost in the murmur of the creek. I stayed still, letting her set the pace. Would you have been here with me if I weren't your mate? Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, hesitant. I've been watching you for years, I said, my voice barely above the creek's whisper. Every day I saw you, I couldn't look away. I don't know if I would have been here without the bond, but I am glad I am. Glad I'm here with you. And even more, glad you're mine. She stayed impossibly close. The gold of her eyes, the warmth radiating from her, the faintest curve of her lips. It made it impossible to breathe normally. Calder, she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to pull at me. I moved toward her, slowly. My hand went to her jaw, thumb brushing beneath her ear, feeling the heat of her skin settle into my chest. I tilted her face gently up. She let me, eyes open and then closing as I lowered mine. I kissed her. All patience, all careful restraint of weeks dissolved at once. Her lips were warm, soft, and she kissed me back with a hesitant urgency. One hand found my jacket, gripping the fabric, clinging like she needed an anchor. My wolf roared, wanting more, but I held myself steady, letting her set the pace. Her pulse thrummed beneath my hand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her fingers slid up, tangling in my hair. I responded in kind, careful but insistent, until I could feel the balance returning. Foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling, stillness settling over us. You are beautiful, so beautiful, I murmured, possessive but gentle. My lips brushed her forehead in a soft kiss. Mine. She smiled, a small, quiet curve of lips, and I noticed a tear gleaming at the corner of her eye. We stayed like that for a long moment, the creek murmuring below, the cold brushing at our backs, and the world beyond the path fading away.
Phoena.
I walked home from the creek with my hand pressed flat against my chest, my wolf thrumming hard against my ribs. My lips still tingled from his kiss, the warmth lingering, soft and impossible to forget. I felt safe in that memory, cherished, the world outside muted as if it existed only to frame him, to frame that moment. But even in that safety, the Pax Amara's words echoed faintly in my mind. He deserves someone capable, someone who can stand beside him fully. I thought of him, steady, certain, perfect in ways I could not match. He needed more than I could give, and I knew it. My heart clenched at the realization. I loved him, deeply, fully, but love alone wasn't enough. The wolf inside me howled, raw and aching, sensing the loss before I could accept it. Every beat of my heart was a reminder that I was about to take away what he deserved. And yet, I could not let my selfish desire, the need for his thread, his warmth, the kiss, keep him from someone worthy. I moved through my room, clothes, cash, the pressed flower from my mother's grave soft at the edges. I packed quickly. I left a note for my roommates rested on the desk. "I'm leaving. Please don't search for me." I pressed my hand to my chest again, feeling the ache, the emptiness, the weight of every step I was about to take. Each step stretched the thread, pulling me towards him taut, each pulse a sharp reminder of what I was abandoning. My wolf howled again, a sound of pain and protest, as if understanding the enormity of my choice. My heart felt like it was breaking in sync with the thread that tethered me to him. I left the room, the territory stretching before me like a world suddenly unfamiliar. Each familiar path felt hollow, each shadowed corner, a reminder of what I was leaving behind. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The thread pulled taut, and with every step, something inside me fractured, the part of me that had finally felt safe, cherished, loved. By the time I reached the South Road, the ache had settled into a quiet, insistent thrum. My wolf pressed against my ribs, relentless, and I let the tears fall. I walked on, letting the cold press against me, letting the darkness carry me south, away from the pack, away from him, away from what I knew I could never claim. And with that final step, I realized something inside me had broken.
Chapter 6. Phoena.
The city smelled like absence. Everything was missing. Pine, cold stone, the living density of pack territory, the particular scent landscape of belonging to a place that belonged back. What the city had instead was exhaust and concrete, and the flat, anonymous smell of 10,000 strangers who had no connection to each other, and no idea that the woman walking among them was feeling every bit of that disconnection in her bones. I found a room above a laundromat. It had a window that opened east and enough sky to breathe by, which were the only two things I required. The rooms I'd looked at before this one had windows that didn't open properly or opened onto narrow building shafts, and I'd stood in each one and felt the walls press in and known I couldn't live there. The laundromat room had sky. Not much, but sky. I slept with it cracked open for the first week and lay in the narrow bed and waited for my wolf to stir. She didn't. I'd felt it on the bus, somewhere around the second hour south. Not gone. I could feel the shadow of her, faint and quiet, the way you feel a room when the light has gone out of it. She was there. She was just not moving. I lay in the narrow bed in the laundromat room and reached for her the way I'd always reached for her since the shift, and found nothing responding. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum, fingers digging slightly into the place where my wolf had always lived like a second heartbeat. For a moment, I thought maybe she was only hiding, curled somewhere deep inside, waiting for me to calm down. But when I reached for her, there was nothing. The absence was wrong. Terribly wrong. My wolf had never left me before. Even when she was quiet, she was there, watching, breathing, humming softly in the back of my mind. A presence, a warmth. Now the space where she should have been felt hollow. I lay in the dark, staring at the thin strip of sky through the open window. On the fourth morning, I walked until I found a diner with a vacancy card in the window. The card was handwritten, slightly crooked, taped to the inside of the glass. I stood on the pavement and looked at it for a moment and then went in. The manager was a broad, tired man named Gus, who looked at me the way people looked at things they were deciding whether to bother with. "Experience?" he said. "No," I said. "You're honest, at least." He handed me an apron. 3 shifts trial. You break things, they come out of your wages. I tied the apron and started the next morning. I was a bad waitress for the first 2 weeks. My first service, I dropped soup into the lap of a man in a gray suit. He was irritated. I brought napkins. He didn't leave my tip. Mara worked the afternoon shift. She sat next to me in the break room and said, "You're the quiet one," and then kept talking, without requiring anything from me except existing in the vicinity. She talked about the specials rotation and whether the new sous chef was going to last the month and her sister's upcoming wedding, and a book she was reading that she thought was good but not as good as everyone was saying. With wolves, you didn't need to explain yourself this way. The pack felt you, ambient and continuous, the emotional weather of everyone around you part of the air you breathed. They always sensed my hesitation and left me alone. Humans didn't have that. Mara sat close enough that my first instinct was to angle away, to find the exit point of the bench, to create distance before she could occupy it. I held still instead, breathed through it. Let her talk. She didn't notice my discomfort the way a wolf would have. She just kept talking, warm and undemanding, and after 20 minutes I realized my shoulders had dropped. At night it was worse. During the day I had the diner, the orders and the noise and the ongoing effort of being a person in a human city. At night I came back to the laundromat room and the narrow bed and the window cracked open to the east, and I had nothing to put between me and the quiet. My wolf still didn't stir. I'd reach for her in the dark and find that same faint shadow, present but absent, like she'd gone somewhere I couldn't follow, and the loneliness of it sat on top of the loneliness I'd always had and made both of them heavier. I'd been lonely since I was 8. I knew the shape of it. I'd built my life around it so carefully and for so long that I'd stopped noticing it was there, the way you stop noticing the sound of a house settling. It was just the texture of existing. But now I knew the difference. I'd sat on a creek wall with his hand over mine and not counted once. I'd sat across a library table for weeks and felt, slowly, the machinery unlock, and for the first time in 10 years, proximity had not felt like a threat. He had been patient in a way that had no bottom to it, and he had said both things, and he had kissed me like I was worth the care. I knew what it felt like now. The knowing made the absence of it into something with edges. I lay in the dark. I just lay there and thought about the creek wall and his thumb moving once across the back of my hand, and I let the ache be what it was, and the window let in the cold, and the city made its distant sounds, and my wolf was somewhere deep and quiet and still. I wondered what he was doing, whether he was working late, whether the light in the back study was on. 6 weeks in, the diner was 3 deep at the counter on a Saturday afternoon, and I was moving between tables with a tray when someone grabbed my wrist. Not aggressively, just a man trying to get my attention, his hand closing around my wrist to stop me passing, the kind of thing people did in busy diners without thinking about it. I froze. The tray went still in my hands. Everything went still. The noise of the diner was suddenly very loud and very far away at the same time, and my chest locked in the way it had been locking since I was a child, the old machinery, the 10-year-old reflex, and I stood there completely unable to move. The man was already saying something, apologizing probably, his hand gone, but I was somewhere slightly outside the moment and coming back to it slowly. Mara appeared at my elbow. She didn't say anything immediately. She just took the tray out of my hands and set it on the nearest surface and stood close, not touching, just present, and waited until I came the rest of the way back. "Come on," she said. "Break." We sat in the back. She brought 2 coffees and didn't ask what had happened. After a while, she said, "That happens to you sometimes. Not just today. Yes. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. My cousin sees someone, a therapist. She said it helps. She paused. I'm not saying you need to. I'm just saying it helped her. I looked at my coffee. I will leave her card on the board, Mara said. The card had been on the diner's community board for 3 weeks before I took it. I'd looked at it every time I refilled my coffee. Dr. Lenara Voss, LCSW. Anxiety, attachment, grief. I'd told myself I was looking at it the way you look at anything pinned to a board, idly, without intention. Mara had said my cousin sees someone and it helped with stuff she'd been carrying a long time, and I'd said okay, and that had been that. Then the man grabbed my wrist on the Saturday rush, and the tray went still in my hands, and I stood there in the middle of the diner noise coming back to myself slowly and thought, fine, I'll go. The office was smaller than I expected. 2 chairs angled toward each other, a plant on the windowsill, good light. Dr. Lenara was perhaps 50, reading glasses on her head, and she smiled when I came in and said, sit wherever feels comfortable. I sat closest to the door. She didn't comment on that. The first session I gave her the brief version of myself, the version I kept tidy and short and deployed when necessary. Community upbringing, parents gone young, fine. She listened and wrote things down and at the end said same time next week and I said yes and left. I went back the following Tuesday, and the one after that I wasn't sure why exactly. She hadn't done anything remarkable. She asked questions and listened to the answers and occasionally said something that lodged in me on the walk home and stayed there for days. That was all. But that was not nothing. The thing about Dr. Lenara was that she didn't let me stay in the safe parts. I'd arrive with a tidy version of something and she'd ask one question and the tidy version would come apart at the seams. Not because she pushed. She never pushed. She just asked the one question I hadn't asked myself. I told her about my father in the 3rd week, how he'd followed my mother within the year, how there had been nothing physically wrong with him, just the particular grief of someone for whom the world had been organized around one person. She listened, and then she said, what do you think it was like for you, watching him? Not what happened. What was it like? And I sat there and reached past the tidy version and found something much older, the texture of that time. A small child in a house watching her father move through rooms not looking at anything. Not looking at her. He stopped seeing me, I said, after she died. I was there and he just stopped. She was quiet for a moment. And what did you make of that? She said. At 8. I knew the answer. I'd known it for years without having words for it. That I wasn't enough to make him stay, I said. The room went very quiet. Have you said that out loud before? She said. No. She didn't rush to tell me I was wrong. She didn't soften it. She just let it be there, in the room, between us. How does it feel to say it? She said. True, I said, and terrible. Both of those can be accurate at the same time, she said. I walked home that week and stood at the laundromat window for a long time. I thought about a small child watching her father go absent and drawing the only conclusion available to her, that the absence was about her, that she was not the reason to stay. That night I reached for my wolf and felt, for the first time since I'd left, something shift under my hand. Not much. A breath. Something sleeping turning over. I held very still until it was gone. Then I lay in the dark and thought, okay. Keep going. I told Dr. Lenara about him somewhere in the 5th week. She'd asked about relationships and I'd said not here, and she'd looked at me the way she sometimes looked at me, following a thread, and said, tell me about that. So I told her. The shape of it. A man who came back every week and left space and didn't push. Who had kissed me on a wall above a creek and I had kissed him back, and then I had packed a bag in the dark and left without a word. She listened without writing anything. Why did you leave? She said. Because I decided I wasn't right for him. Did he say that? No. Did anyone? I thought about Amara in the hall, warm, concerned, perfectly warm and concerned, Ceremonies and border assemblies and holding the room. I told them you'd grow into it. Someone implied it, I said. Someone who cared about him, and I already thought it so it confirmed something, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Did you ask him? She said. Before you left. What he thought? No. Why not? I opened my mouth, closed it. Because I was certain, I said finally. I thought I already knew. His answer or yours? I looked at her plant. I walked home that week and stood at the window and turned that over for a long time. His answer or yours? I'd been so certain I knew what he thought that I'd never given him the chance to think it. The weeks passed and the sessions kept going and something was slowly, quietly happening to me. Not fixed, not healed. Something more like a stone being turned over, the underneath of it slowly coming into the light. Dr. Linera helped me see my father for what he was, a man drowning in grief, not a verdict. That 8-year-old had done the best she could. She'd watched the person she needed go absent, and she'd decided the safest thing was to need nothing. And she'd been wrong, and she'd been running things for 10 years. I cried on the bus home after that session. The nights were still hard. I'd come home from the diner and open the window and lie in the narrow bed and think about him. Not managing it the way I used to, just letting myself think about him, the library, the creek wall, the exhale against my mouth. I wondered what he was doing, whether he was looking or whether he'd stopped. I didn't know which of those would hurt more. My wolf was slowly coming back. I'd feel her in the mornings, a warmth low and quiet, like an ember deciding to be a fire again. She didn't surge forward the way she used to. She was too careful for that. But she was there. Some evenings she'd turn north and hold there, and I'd let her, and the bond would pull faint and distant and pointing north, and I'd lie in the narrow bed and let that be true. I know, I'd tell her. She'd press back warm and wait. The thing I kept arriving at week after week was this. The running had never worked. Not once. Every exit I'd mapped and used, every room I'd left before anything real could happen, every conversation kept short enough not to become something. I'd been doing it since I was 8 years old, and I had been lonely the whole time. The loneliness hadn't gotten smaller with distance. It had just lost its name. I'd been so busy making sure I was never in the position my father had left me in, never the one who needed someone to stay, that I'd done it to myself. Quietly, in advance, before anyone else could. I'd left him before he could leave me, and I'd been alone ever since and called it safety. Dr. Linara didn't say it like that. She let me find my way to it myself over several weeks, arriving at pieces of it and bringing them back and turning them over until the whole shape became clear. The running isn't keeping you safe, she said once. It's just keeping you moving. I'd thought about that for days. I told Mara I was leaving on a Thursday evening after the shift. She looked at me, and then at my bag, and then back at me. Today, she said. Tomorrow morning, I said. I wanted to tell you tonight. She put the coffee pot down and came around the counter and hugged me. I stood there a second, and then put my arms around her and let her. You have my number, she said when she let go. Yes. Use it. I want to know how it goes, she pointed at me. Good or bad, I want to know. Okay, I said. She looked at me for a moment. You seem different, she said, than that first day. I feel different, I said. She squeezed my arm and went back to her tables. I stood at the counter and looked at the diner for a moment. Gus behind the pass, the crooked handwritten specials board, the community board where the card had been. I picked up my bag and walked out. Mrs. Demir was at the bottom of the stairs in the morning. She looked at my bag and her face did something complicated, and then she went to her apartment and came back with a container of soup and pressed it into my hands. For the bus, she said. Thank you, I said, for all of it. She waved her hand like it had been nothing. I stood on the pavement and looked up at the window, cracked open still. 7 months of sky through that window. 7 months of lying in the narrow bed, reaching for my wolf in the dark and finding her slowly, slowly coming back. I put the soup in my bag next to the paperback. I walked to the bus terminal. The bus went north, and at the first mile past the city's edge, the bond pulled straight and firm and immediate, and deep inside me my wolf surged forward for the first time in 7 months, warm and certain and completely awake.
Calder.
Daria answered the door on Saturday morning and stepped back to let me in. She told me quietly that Phoena was gone yesterday night. Her things were mostly still there, but her bag and her coat were missing. I looked at the open door to her room. The coat hook empty, the small frame on the shelf with nothing in it, the bed made with the neatness of someone who had decided to leave things tidy before they went. Yesterday night, the night after the creek wall. I walked out. I shifted at the tree line and ran. My wolf had her scent everywhere on this territory. The library, the archive room, the creek wall, the south path. Months of her moving through packland and leaving the trail of herself behind. And he followed every thread of it with his nose to the ground, the cold air burning through his lungs. He followed her scent to the creek wall and back to the housing block and south, down the south path, through the lower meadow, all the way to the territory boundary, where it ended. He stood at the boundary line with his sides heaving and her scent cut off clean in front of him. My wolf threw his head back, and the sound that came out of him went out into the trees, and the territory gave nothing back. He was still standing there when Reich's wolf came through the tree line behind him. I turned. My wolf's lip pulled back, and the warning built low in his chest, and Reich stopped and held very still. He didn't push. He just stood 10 feet back in the dark and waited. And eventually the sound ran out, and the cold settled in, and there was nothing left but the empty boundary line and the dark to the south of it. Reich came forward and stood beside me. We looked south for a long time. Then he turned back toward pack territory and I followed. We shifted at the east tree line. Reich found clothes from the garrison cache and handed them over without being asked and waited while I dressed. She crossed on foot, I said. Her scent ends at the line. 3 miles south it dissolves where the old trade road crosses through. She had help getting further. We will find her, he said. I nodded. I'm going to my father. He walked with me without another word. My father answered the door himself. He took one look at me and stepped back. We went to his study and he sat across from me, and I told him everything. He listened with his hands folded and his expression steady, and when I finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. I need you to reach out to every neighboring pack, I said. Anyone who's seen an unmated female wolf passing through? I will do that, he said. Anyone with contacts further out. Anyone who might know something. I'll find them. He looked at me. She left on her own terms. I know. I pressed my thumb into the arm of the chair. I need to find her anyway. He didn't argue. He said, get some rest. The messages would go out. We'd know more by end of week. My mother found me in the training yard the next morning. She stood beside me and watched the yard and let the silence sit for a while. You didn't come to breakfast, she said. I wasn't hungry. She looked at me with the particular look she had when she'd already decided something and was giving me the chance to arrive there myself first. Come to dinner tonight, she said. I went. My father talked about the Westfield boundary meeting and the south fence repairs and a dispute between 2 eastern families needing mediation. Normal things. Pack things. I answered where answers were required and ate enough that neither of them said anything about it. After dinner, my mother walked out to the terrace with me. She stood beside me and looked at the grounds. We will find her, son, she said. I know. I looked at the east tree line and said nothing. She put her hand on my arm briefly. She didn't touch people often or lightly. She went inside. I stood on the terrace and looked at the grounds and thought about the night Phoena's wolf had stood at the tree line, and I had gone out barefoot on the frost and set down my glass and taken one step forward, and everything had changed. I went back to the study. I kept the light on. The responses from the neighboring packs came in over the following days. Negative, negative, negative. Each one landed the same way, a door closing. She hadn't passed through any of them. She had walked out of pack territory and into the world beyond it and left no trail that any of us could follow. Foss came back from running past the boundary line with her scent tracked to the old trade road 3 miles south before it dissolved entirely. A cart had passed through recently, traders by the smell of it, heading further out. She'd had help getting distance. After that, nothing. I sent Foss back with 2 more trackers. They came back empty. I ran the territory every morning before dawn, my wolf checking the south boundary every single time, as though she might have come back in the night. The boundary was always empty, the scent always cold. Elmira knocked on the study door 2 days after I'd been to Daria. I barely knew her beyond the fact that she'd lived in the housing block. She opened the door with a covered plate, and her expression soft with concern. "You haven't been at meals," she said. She set the plate on the desk. "I wanted to say I'm sorry about Phoena." "Thank you," I said. She didn't leave. She stood near the door with her hands folded and looked at them for a moment, like she was deciding whether to say something difficult. "I probably shouldn't," she said, "but I'd want someone to tell me." She looked up. She was uncomfortable. "With you?" She mentioned it a few times. How you were always finding reasons to be near her. Always around. She said it felt like too much. Like she couldn't breathe. Her expression was pained and careful. "I don't think she knew how to tell you. She didn't want to hurt you, but I think that's part of why she went." The room was very quiet. "She said that," I said. "I'm sorry," Amara said softly. "I thought you deserved to know the truth, even if it's hard to hear." She left. I sat at the desk and didn't move for a long time. Always around. Too much. Couldn't breathe. She had kissed me back on that wall, but she had left. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe I did crowd her, made her uncomfortable. I went to the window and stood there and thought about her walking south in the dark with her bag on her shoulder, and felt the full weight of what it meant that she had chosen the cold and the road over staying here. Over staying near me. Reich found me at the creek wall on a Thursday in the second month. He sat down and looked at the water. "One of my contacts picked up a trail near the outer settlements," he said. 3 days old. It's her." I let out a breath. "She's alive," he said. "She's safe somewhere." I looked at the water for a long time. "I've been thinking," I said, "about when she comes back." Reich said nothing. "If she comes back and she wants nothing to do with me," I said, "that's her right. I'll respect every inch of it. She can have the library and the creek path and the east bench, and I'll take a different route every morning. I'll stay on the other side of the territory if that's what she needs." I pressed my thumb into the wall. "I just need to know she's here. I need to know she's safe and she's home. I can keep the distance. I can watch her from across the territory and never go closer than she wants, and that's enough. That's enough for me." Reich looked at me for a long moment. "Calder," he said. "I mean it," I said. "Just having her here. Just knowing she's on the east bench in the mornings and in the library on Tuesdays. That's enough." He was quiet. "I wish she'd talk to me," I said. "That's the thing I can't get past. If she'd decided she didn't want this, I would have let her go. It would have been very hard and I would have let her go, and at least she'd still be here. At least she'd still be in the pack where she belongs." I pressed my thumb harder into the wall. "She didn't give me that. She decided in the dark on her own and left, and I found out from Daria." "She was frightened," Reich said. "I know she was frightened." "Not of you." "I don't think that is true." I paused. The creek ran. The night came down cold. "She'll come back," he said. "You don't know that." We sat there until the cold settled through both of us, and neither of us said anything else. I went home. The third month was when the anger arrived. The grief I'd had since Saturday morning, the worry, the sleepless nights, the running the boundary line every dawn. I knew the shape of all of that by now. The anger was different. It came one evening when the work was done, and I had nothing to put between me and the thinking, and I sat at the desk and felt something that had been patient for 3 months simply run out. She could have talked to me. I would have let her go. Actually, that's not true. I couldn't do that. But I would have just watched her from distance and let her be. If she had sat across from me and said, "I don't want this," I would have given her every door she needed. I would have stepped back and given her the whole territory to move through freely, and never made her feel chased because I had spent years watching her. And I knew exactly what it looked like when she felt chased, and I would not have done that to her. She hadn't given me the chance. She had decided on her own and left, and I had been scouring the territory and reaching out to neighboring packs and sending trackers down the south road for 3 months. And somewhere beyond the boundary, she was living her life and didn't know any of it. and I was sitting at my desk at midnight with my hands flat on the wood, and the anger and the grief and the missing her all sitting in my chest at the same time with nowhere to go. I pressed my thumb into the desk until it hurt, then I went back to work. Wright came to the study without knocking the following evening. He sat down and looked at me. "You look worse than last week," he said. "I'm fine. Your mother stopped me at training this morning. I'm eating." "Calder." I said nothing. He leaned back. "Come to the garrison tomorrow. Patrol team is eating at 6. Come and sit with people. I have work. The work will be there at 7. He paused. "I'm not asking you to stop looking. I'm asking you to eat dinner with other people like a person." I looked at him. "She's coming back," he said. Quieter now, the teasing entirely gone. "I don't know when, but she's coming back, and when she does, I need you standing. Not the version of you that's running the boundary at 4 every morning and working until midnight and eating whatever gets left outside the door." He held my gaze. I looked at the desk. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," I said. "I know. I keep arriving at nothing." "Because there is nothing," he said. "You were patient and careful and exactly right, and she left anyway because she was frightened. That's not something you could have fixed. That was hers to fix." He paused. "And she will. She'll fix it, and she'll come back, and I need you here when she does." I pressed my thumb into the desk. "And if she doesn't," I said. Reich was quiet for a long moment. "Then you'll still be the man who gave her every chance." I looked at the window. The grounds were dark and still, and the east tree line was the same it had always been. "Dinner tomorrow," Reich said. 6 o'clock. He left. Some nights were harder than others. I sat at the desk after the work was done, and the thinking arrived, and I had nothing left to put between me and it. The creek wall, her forehead against mine in the dark, her hand inside my jacket and the soft exhale she hadn't meant for me to hear. The way she had looked at me for one brief moment before she picked up her book and walked up the path. I had searched for 3 months. 3 months of empty roads and fading scent trails. 3 months of trackers and neighboring packs and quiet conversations that ended the same way. Nothing. Every time I left the territory, I believed the next place would have something. A trace. A direction. Something my wolf could follow. There had always been something before. Now there was only absence. I sat at the desk one night with the grounds dark outside and the study quiet around me, and something moved through my chest that had no edges to it. A quiet grief I hadn't felt since I was very young. The realization came slowly. I might never find her. She might not come back. The thought settled somewhere deep inside me, heavy and final. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and sat alone in the dark of my own study and let it come. I hadn't cried since I was 11 years old. I sat there for a long time. Eventually the storm passed the way storms always do, leaving the world quieter than before. I lowered my hands and looked toward the window. The east tree line. The same tree line it had always been. The south boundary somewhere beyond it. Empty and cold now. The scent trail long gone. For a moment I let myself imagine she might still walk back through those trees. Then I let the thought go. I picked up my pen. I went back to work. I kept the light on.
Chapter 7. Phoena.
The border sentries were Olin and a younger wolf I didn't recognize. I walked up to the northwest checkpoint in the afternoon with my bag on one shoulder and waited. Olin registered my face and reached for his radio. "Phoena," he said. "Yes, I've been gone. I'm back. I know the protocol." He called it in. I stood at the checkpoint and breathed pack air for the first time in 7 months. Pine and cold stone and the living density of a place that knew what it was. My wolf pressed forward with everything she had, and I let her come and stood there with my hand flat against my sternum. The escort took me to the Alpha's meeting room. Old wood and decades of decisions. He was already there, standing at the head of the table with his arms at his sides. His mate was at the window. She looked at me once, long and thorough. Then she sat, which felt like a permission. "Sit down," he said. I sat. "Where have you been?" "Outside pack territory. Found work, found a room, stayed until I understood what I'd done and what to do about it." "How long?" 7 months. He let that number sit in the room. The first 2 months, he said, we contacted every neighboring pack, sent parties to the neutral roads. He stopped. Calder ran the eastern border himself for 8 weeks, every night. My hands were flat on my knees. He would not ask others to do what he wasn't doing himself, he said. You know what that means for a man like him. Yes, I said. I understand what that means. 5th month, the formal search was stood down. His gaze was steady. He never mentioned stopping. I stopped it. I looked at the table. The image of it sat in my chest. 8 weeks, every night, the cold and the dark and the empty scent trail and him running it anyway. I know what I did, I said. I know it was more than wrong. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, something had shifted in his voice. Re-entry terms, he said. 3 months, full evaluation, contribution and assessment, same as any outside recruit. A pause. You accept these because you have no choice, or because you intend to honor them. I intend to honor them, I said. His mate looked at me from across the room, not the careful nod from the announcement night, something fuller, recognition. Then welcome back, he said. And this time it was warm. My old room was gone, 90 days automatic reallocation. The new one was smaller, north-facing, near the communal bath. I unpacked in 10 minutes. The pressed flower on the windowsill, the notebooks in the drawer, the paperback on the shelf, the one I'd told myself I hadn't taken, found in the bottom of my bag 3 weeks after leaving and carried for 7 months. I stood in the middle of the small room and looked at those 3 things. I am here on purpose, I thought. This is mine. I thought it until it stopped being something I was telling myself. I wanted to find him. My wolf wanted to find him with an insistence that had nothing patient left in it after 7 months of pointing north. I held her back. Not like this. Not unprepared. Correctly this time. Tomorrow. I was crossing the main grounds toward the housing block when Amara came through the Alpha Mansion gate. She saw me and stopped. Phoena! She came forward. You're back. I wasn't sure you would be. Yes, I said. I'm glad you're safe. She paused, and something in her expression shifted into something more careful. I should tell you something. I don't want it to be awkward. She met my eyes, her voice warm and even. Calder and I have been spending a lot of time together. These past months, it became something. I thought you should hear it from me. A small pause. I hope there's no bad blood. Genuinely. You left and life moves. You understand. I looked at her. She held my gaze, open and concerned and perfectly kind. Thank you for telling me, I said. She nodded once and walked past. I stood there. The thread pulled warm and steady toward the door she'd just come out of. I turned around and walked back to the small north-facing room and sat on the edge of the bed, and the bottom dropped out of my chest. She and Calder. I pressed my fist against my sternum and sat in the dark and thought, you knew this was possible. You left. You walked south and stayed gone for 7 months and life moves. She said it herself. You knew this when you got on the bus going north this morning and you came anyway. But knowing it was possible and sitting with it being real were 2 completely different things. I pressed harder against my chest. He had waited 8 weeks on the eastern border. He had kept the study light on. He had looked for me for months. And I hadn't come back. And someone had been there. The tears came and I let them come, the quiet kind, and I sat in the dark of the small north-facing room and let the full weight of what I had done sit on my chest. I had cost myself this. I had done it.
Calder.
His father told him at the end of the day. He set his pen down before the door fully opened. Something in the footsteps. She's back, his father said. The words landed somewhere in the center of his chest and stayed there. Phoena came to the border this afternoon. She's accepted the re-entry terms. He looked at his desk. She was here. On packed territory. Somewhere within the boundary line he had run every morning for 8 weeks in the cold and the dark. His wolf's nose to the ground, finding nothing, and running it again anyway, because stopping meant accepting she had chosen to go, and he had not been ready to accept that. She was here. He pressed his thumb into the edge of the desk and thought about everything he had told himself over the last 2 months. What he would do if she came back. He had been so certain he knew. He would give her space. He would let her settle. He would not appear at her door like the 8 months hadn't happened. Like the empty scent trail and Daria's face in the doorway were things that could simply be folded away. He had been so certain. "I'll respect the re-entry terms," he said. "She's here to contribute to the pack. I'll treat it that way." His father looked at him for a long moment. "Calder, I know what I want to do," he said. "I'm not going to do it." His father left. He looked at the border assessment open on his desk. He read the same line 4 times. He told himself he just needed to see her once. Just to know she was real, and she was here, and she was safe. He had spent months not knowing, and Reich's contact saying she was alive was not the same as seeing. He just needed to see her once, and then he would go and give her every inch of space she needed. He walked to the housing block. He knocked on the door of the small north-facing room. She opened it. She looked tired. Her eyes were swollen and red. She'd lost some weight, not dramatically, but enough that he noticed it and felt it somewhere deep in his chest. He wanted to pull her in immediately. He wanted to put his arms around her and hold on and press his face into her hair and not let go. And the wanting of it hit him so hard that for a moment he couldn't say anything at all. He built the wall, fast, deliberate, with everything he had. "You left without a word," he said. Her eyes filled. She held it, just barely. "I'm sorry," she said. The way her voice broke on those 2 words. He felt the wall strain under the weight of it, and he held it harder because if it came down now, he was going to pull her in and hold on, and he didn't know if she wanted that, and he had promised himself he would not make this harder for her. "I'm glad you're back," he said. He kept his voice even with the effort of it. "And I want you to know, I won't crowd you. I understand now that I made things difficult. I won't do that again." Something moved in her face. He left before he could look at it long enough to understand what it was. He walked across the grounds in the dark and did not look back, and he felt the thread pull behind him with every step, and he kept walking and told himself this was right. This was the correct thing. She had come back to the pack and she deserved to settle here without him making it harder. He went back to the study. He sat at the desk. He did not pick up his pen for a long time.
Phoena.
I stood in the open doorway after his footsteps faded and could not move for a while. "I won't crowd you. I understand now that I made things difficult." I pressed my hand flat against the doorframe. His eyes. That was the thing I kept coming back to. His eyes had always been warm when he looked at me, a specific warmth I had catalogued since the library without letting myself name it. Tonight there had been something careful in them, something that had been warm and was now being held very deliberately in check. I had done that. I went back inside. I sat on the bed and thought about what he had said. I made things difficult. "I won't crowd you." I hadn't found it difficult. I had never found him too much. The opposite. The very opposite. And he had said that like he believed it, like it was something he'd concluded and sat with, and I didn't understand where he had gotten it from. And then Amara's voice in the grounds. "Calder and I have been spending a lot of time together." I pressed my hands flat on my knees and thought about that. About him on the eastern border for 8 weeks, and then coming home to the study and working late and someone appearing with food and warmth and concern every day while I was 200 miles south. She had been there and I hadn't. That was real regardless of anything else. The tears came again, different from before, deeper and less quiet, and I sat in the small north-facing room and pressed my hands over my mouth and let them come and thought about a library and a creek wall and his hand over mine and the feeling of the machinery unlocking. The first time in 10 years proximity had not felt like a threat. I had run from that. I had run from the best thing that had ever happened to me and come back to find it gone, and I had done it myself. Every single part of it. When the worst of it had passed, I lay back on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling. My wolf pressed against my ribs. I thought about Dr. Lenara. The running doesn't protect you, it just means you arrive at the loss alone. I had arrived at the loss alone, but I was still here. He needed to know the truth. Whatever conclusion he had reached about crowding me and making things difficult, that was not the truth, and he deserved the truth. Even if what came after was him closing the door, even if he looked at me and said, "I understand," and walked away and went back to her, he needed to know why I left. My wolf pressed forward. I pressed my hand against my sternum. "Tomorrow," I told her.
Chapter 8. Phoena.
He was avoiding me. He was in the training yard at dawn, but gone before I arrived. He was in the library on different days than before. When our paths crossed in the grounds, he acknowledged me briefly and moved on. I went to the training yard every morning and worked my circuits in the gray light and thought about how to find him alone long enough to say what needed to be said. On the 5th morning, he was there when I arrived. He was mid-session, his back to the gate, and I stood for a moment and watched him before he heard me. The precision of him, the way he moved through the yard like he owned every inch of it without appearing to think about it. He turned. We looked at each other across the empty yard. "Can I join your circuit?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's a free yard," he said. We trained in parallel for 30 minutes, and neither of us spoke, and the thread hummed between us the whole time, warm and unaddressed, and when the session ended, he picked up his things and left. I wanted to follow him, but too scared to do it. I stood in the empty yard with my hands at my sides. The pattern held for 4 more days. Dawn, the training yard, both of us arriving early, working our separate circuits, occasionally in parallel, not speaking beyond the minimal. He was precise and careful, and he gave me exactly the distance he had promised, and not 1 inch more. I stood there for a long moment before I found the courage to walk toward him. He was near the edge of the training yard, looking toward the trees, the same trees that had watched me leave months ago. "I need to tell you something," I said. His shoulders shifted slightly. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "I know." My voice felt thin. "I want to tell you anyway." He sat down on the low stone wall at the edge of the yard. I stayed standing. For a moment, the words refused to come. "I left because I decided I wasn't right for you," I said finally. He didn't move. "For your position, for the pack, for everything a Luna is supposed to be." My hands hung useless at my sides. I've spent my whole life being the person who stands near the wall and hopes no one notices she's there. And I looked at you, and everything you carry, and I thought you needed someone stronger. His gaze stayed on the ground. "So I told myself I was protecting you." My throat tightened. "I wasn't." The wind moved through the yard. "Nada. I've been running from anything that could matter since I was 8 years old," I said quietly. "Every room, every conversation, every person who might see me too clearly." I swallowed. "I leave before anything can be taken." He lifted his head slightly. "You were the first person who ever made me feel like the space I took up was exactly right." My voice shook, like I didn't have to shrink to fit somewhere. I took a breath that didn't feel like enough, and that terrified me. His eyes met mine now, because if I let myself have that, and then lost it, my voice faltered. I didn't think I would survive it. The silence stretched. "So I left first," I said. He looked away again. "Amara told me something after you left." My chest tightened. "She said you told her I was always around you, that I made you uncomfortable." His voice was quiet. "That you couldn't breathe." My head snapped up. "I never said that." He looked at me then. "She said that was why you left." "I barely spoke to her," I said, shaking my head. "She wasn't someone I talked to." The realization moved slowly across his face. Then I said quietly, "She told me you were with her." He stared at me. "She said what?" "That you and her—" My voice faltered. "That you'd moved on." For a moment, he just looked at me. Then he stood. He turned away, staring out across the empty yard. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight like he was holding something in place. I watched him understand it. Piece by piece, everything she had said to him, everything she had said to me, how carefully it had been placed between us. He stood there a long moment. Then he turned back. "There has never been anything between Amara and me," he said. His voice was steady now. "She brought food to the study sometimes. I thanked her and went back to work." His eyes held mine. "I wasn't paying attention to her." A pause. "I was trying to find you." The words hit me like a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "You looked for me?" "Every day. I never stopped." My throat tightened. "Every neighboring pack, every road south, every place your scent might have gone." His gaze didn't leave mine. My chest hurt. "I thought you didn't want me," he said quietly. My eyes filled. "I never stopped wanting you," I whispered. The yard was silent except for the wind moving through the grass. "I don't know if I'm too late," I said. My voice trembled. "I know I left. I know what that must have done to you." The tears came and I didn't try to stop them. "And I know I don't deserve anything from you now." The morning air felt cold against my skin. "But I came back because I couldn't stay away." I pressed my hand against my chest. "Every day in that city I missed you so much it felt like something inside me was breaking." The words came out uneven. "I don't know how to stop loving you." He didn't move. "I know I don't have the right to ask," I whispered. My voice broke. "Is there any part of you that still wants me?" For a moment, he just looked at me. Then he crossed the yard. His hands came up and held my face, warm and steady, like they had always belonged there. His forehead rested lightly against mine. His thumbs brushed the tears from my cheeks. "Phoena," he said softly, "I have been yours since the day your wolf came to my quarter." My chest tightened painfully. "And I never stopped being yours." The words settled between us, heavy, certain. I covered his hands with mine. "I'm still afraid," I whispered. "I know. But I want to stay." Something softened in his eyes then. "Then stay." And he kissed me. Not like the creek wall. The creek wall had been careful, the patience of 4 weeks finally breaking. This had nothing careful in it. His mouth crashed into mine and his arms hauled me against him like he meant to make up for every inch we'd kept between us. The impact knocked the breath out of me for half a second, and then I grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands and pulled him even closer, kissing him back just as hard. There was nothing hesitant in it. His hand slid up into my hair, fingers tangling, holding tight as he tilted my head back to deepen the kiss. My grip tightened in the thick fabric of his jacket, dragging him down to me like I was afraid he might disappear again if I let go. He made a low sound against my mouth, rough, warm, real, and it sent a sharp shiver through me. I pushed forward, pressing him back a half step, and his arms came around me instantly, one locking firm across my back while the other gripped my waist hard enough to pull me flush against him. There wasn't an inch of space left between us now. We kissed like we'd been starving, like 8 months of missing each other had finally snapped. His mouth moved against mine with a kind of desperate certainty, and I answered it without thinking, my hands sliding from his jacket to his shoulders, then around his neck, holding on as if that alone could keep him here. He tightened his grip in response, fingers digging slightly into my side as he pulled me closer still, his forehead bumping mine for half a second before his mouth found mine again. The world had gone quiet around us. The empty training yard, the gray morning light, the cold air. None of it mattered. We stood there in the middle of it, clutching at each other like we had no intention of ever letting go again. When he finally lifted his head, we were both breathing hard. His forehead against mine, his hands still in my hair. He pulled me back in and held on, and I pressed my face against his jaw and closed my eyes. The thread between us settled. No thinness left in it, no stretch, no ache, full and present and completely at rest.
Calder.
I called Amara to my father's meeting room 3 days later. She came in composed and stood across from the desk. My father sat behind it, silent for a moment while Reich stood by the wall. "I have been informed," my father said calmly, "that you deliberately misled 2 members of this pack." Amara didn't answer. You told Phoena that you and my son were together. You told my son things meant to convince him she had left because of him. The room went very quiet. Deception that harms a pack member is a violation of pack law. He didn't raise his voice. Pack censure will be entered into the formal record today. You are removed from patrol command effective immediately. For the next 6 months, you will serve outer residential duty. Amara's shoulders stiffened slightly. My father's gaze didn't move. You will not interfere with another member again. He paused once. You're dismissed. She left without another word.
Chapter 9. Phoena.
3 months of re-entry terms. I treated them exactly as I'd promised the Alpha I would. The archive work, the territorial reports, the council presentations, I threw myself into it. Every error properly documented, every discrepancy explained, every meeting faced head-on. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time, the pack saw me try, really try. I didn't shrink back when eyes turned my way. I didn't whisper or sidestep. I stood in the council room, my voice steady, my eyes on the faces around me, and I let myself be seen. Some of them nodded. A few wolves in the back caught my gaze and offered the smallest signs of acknowledgement. Respect, recognition, the first taste of what it might mean to belong fully. The creek wall on a Thursday evening in the second week. He was already there, sprawled with books open, margin notes marking the lines I needed to cross. I joined him, sliding into the cold grass beside him, and we watched the water in silence. The thread was warm between us, not pointing north, not tugging, but steady, comforting. You found the border adjustment? He asked eventually. I did, 14 months ago, I said. He didn't respond, just looked at me. I've been preparing, I added. You've been preparing for everything, he said. I let myself lean a little closer. 6 inches apart. Not much, but enough. I'm sorry, I said finally, for leaving, for all the searches, for not trusting you, or myself. You shouldn't have had to do any of that, he replied. I know, I said, but I needed to fight my own ghosts, and I'm still fighting. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from my face. The warmth of him spread through me, quiet and certain. And for the first time in months, I let myself feel it fully. The thread, my wolf at peace, the pack slowly watching, seeing me come alive. The full moon gathering arrived. I stood at the edge of the eastern meadow as the pack came together. Hundreds of wolves moving in perfect harmony, acknowledging the alpha and his mate. My wolf pressed forward, eager, alert. I shifted. Cold grass under 4 paws, the smell of pine and pack and home filling me. Then his wolf appeared at my shoulder, huge, black with silver tips, eyes exactly like his human ones, matching pace, not leading, not following. Your move, it said. I ran. My wolf chest heaving, my heart racing, my mind clear. Calder ran beside me, shoulder to shoulder, pack parting around us as we moved through the meadow into the forest. The cold air burned my lungs, the wind carried the scent of home, and I felt, finally, that I had fought my demons, that I had returned not just to him, but to myself. By the end of the run, we were breathless, wolves still pressed together. The pack closed around us, acknowledging my presence, my effort, my fight, recognition, respect, acceptance. He shifted back to human form beside me. His hair was messy, frost on his jacket, eyes soft with quiet satisfaction. I met his gaze and smiled, the almost smile we'd shared before now wide and real. Without a word, he gathered me in his arms. I wrapped my arms around his neck, legs around his waist, and let him carry me back to the lodge. My heart pounded not from exertion, but from relief, from belonging, from love. Once inside, the heat of the fire and the lodge hit me, and we didn't stop at the door. Clothes fell to the floor, unnecessary distractions, and we sank onto the bed together. His hands traced every line of me, careful and reverent, yet claiming. I pressed into him, fully, wolf and human, letting every moment of longing, fear, and desire pour out. The thread hummed strong and steady. My wolf, my human self, and him, all of us together, finally home. I let myself melt into him, into us, and finally whispered, "I'm not running anymore." He kissed me, slow and possessive, arms locking me in place. "And I never left," he said. We held each other through the night, the pack's quiet acknowledgement echoing outside, and I finally understood. Coming back meant more than returning to him. It meant claiming myself, facing my demons, and letting the world, my pack, my wolf, my love, see me as I was meant to be. Home. We held each other through the night, the pack quiet around us, and I finally understood. Coming back wasn't just about him. It was about claiming myself, facing my fear, and letting the world, my pack, my wolf, my heart, see me as I truly was. All those months of running, of silence, of trying to hide from what I wanted and needed, they hadn't been wasted. They had been lessons. I had learned that love didn't demand sacrifice of self, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. I had learned that only when I could hold myself steady could I truly hold someone else. This story wasn't about loss or mistakes. It was about learning to stop running, to face what matters, and to meet life and love without flinching. About knowing my own worth so I could accept another's. About letting my heart, my wolf, my entire self belong. I closed my eyes against him, letting the warmth and steadiness of him settle around me, and felt the quiet truth of it. This was always what it had been about.